Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm thrilled to have you with us today. I hope you're feeling energized and ready to dive into something exciting. Today, we're going to combine improving your English listening and speaking skills with a thrilling story. We'll explore how communication can be a key part of unlocking mysteries, just like in our latest story where secrets and twists unfold in unexpected ways. By the end, you'll not only boost your confidence, but also speak more fluently. Let's get started and light up your English journey with this adventure. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Visitor. It was a rainy afternoon when the bell above the door of the detective agency jingled, signaling the arrival of a visitor. The office, tucked away in a quiet corner of London, had seen many curious characters pass through its doors. But this time, the visitor seemed different from the others. As the door opened, a tall man in a dark overcoat stepped inside. His face was pale, and he looked as though he hadn't slept in days. He stood in the doorway, for a moment, scanning the room with wide, anxious eyes, as though he were searching for something or someone. His shoes, shiny at first glance, were now covered in mud, and his coat was soaked from the rain that had been pouring outside. I, Dr. Luke Davis, sat by the window, reading a medical journal, when I noticed him. He was hard to miss, with his imposing figure and the air of distress that seemed to hang around him like a cloud. "Can I help you?" I asked, looking up from my reading. The man hesitated for a moment, then walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he glanced nervously around the room, as if trying to gather his thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with an unmistakable sense of urgency. "I need to speak with Mr. Arthur Holmes," he said, his eyes flickering to the chair across from me. I gestured to the empty seat, indicating he should sit. As he lowered himself into the chair, he seemed to exhale a breath he had been holding in for what felt like hours. He placed a hand to his forehead, his eyes closing for a brief moment, as though trying to steady himself. "Is everything all right?" I asked, noticing his pallor and the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool air in the room. He nodded, but there was a weariness in his face that suggested otherwise. I've been traveling for days. I'm exhausted, but it's not just that. I need help. Urgently." Just then, the door to the small office opened, and there he stood, the man himself, Sherlock Holmes. His sharp gaze immediately took in the visitor, his usual calm and calculated demeanor apparent even in the midst of someone else's distress. "Mr. Collins, I presume?" Holmes inquired, his voice smooth but firm, as though he already knew this man's name without having been told. The visitor, now identified as Mr. Edward Collins, looked at Holmes with a mix of surprise and relief. Yes, that's me. He broke off, looking down at his hands, which were trembling slightly. "I didn't know where else to turn. But I heard of your reputation, Mr. Holmes. I've come to ask for your help. You're my last hope." Holmes raised an eyebrow but remained silent, his piercing eyes never leaving Mr. Collins. "What is it you need help with, Mr. Collins?" Holmes asked, his voice laced with curiosity, yet devoid of emotion. Mr. Collins took a deep breath, then began to explain. "It's my brother, Thomas. He's been missing for over a week now, and I fear the worst. I've searched everywhere I can think of. I've even asked the police for help, but they've turned up nothing. I don't know where else to turn." Holmes tilted his head slightly, showing just a hint of interest. "And why do you fear the worst, Mr. Collins?" Collins looked up, his eyes dark with worry. "Because of the nature of his disappearance. He was last seen in the company of a man who, well, let's just say, does not have the best reputation. He's a criminal, and I'm afraid my brother has gotten mixed up in something far darker than he realizes." "Tell me more about this man," Holmes said, sitting back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the armrest. "He goes by the name of Gregory Blackwood," Collins replied. "A known figure in London's underground world. He's been in and out of prison, and from what I've heard, he's involved in some very dangerous dealings. I don't know if my brother was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if he's become tangled in something much worse." Holmes was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. I could see his mind working, as it always did, piecing together the clues in his head before speaking. "Why do you come to me, Mr. Collins?" Holmes finally asked, his voice steady but inquisitive. "Why not go to the police? Surely they can help you find your brother." Collins hesitated, looking uneasy. "I tried, Mr. Holmes. I really did. But the police, they don't take me seriously. They think I'm overreacting, that my brother just ran off. But I know him. Thomas wouldn't disappear without a word. Something is wrong, and I'm afraid. I'm afraid for his life." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Collins closely. "You've mentioned your brother's name. But what is it you truly seek, Mr. Collins? Do you want me to find him, Or is there something more to this that you're not telling me? Collins swallowed hard, his throat visibly dry. I want you to find him, yes. But more than that, I need you to make sure he's safe. I fear Blackwood has some sort of hold over him, and I don't know what Blackwood is capable of. I can't let my brother fall into his hands. Holmes sat back in his chair, steepling, his fingers together. He was quiet for a moment, as if weighing the situation carefully. Very well, Mr. Collins. I will take your case. But know this, I will not work for free. My time comes at a price, and I expect full cooperation in return. If you're serious about finding your brother, you must trust me completely. Collins nodded eagerly. Of course. Whatever it takes, Mr. Holmes. I just need to know he's safe. Holmes gave a small nod. We will begin immediately. Dr. Davis, prepare for a journey. We're going to find out exactly what's happened to Mr. Collins's brother and more. Importantly, we will uncover the truth about Gregory Blackwood. With that, the first chapter of this mysterious case began, and Holmes, ever determined, took his first steps towards unraveling a web of deceit, danger, and dark secrets. Chapter 2. The First Clue. As Mr. Collins's desperate words echoed in the small office, Holmes remained still, his eyes narrowed with intense concentration. He wasn't one for emotional displays, but I could see the flicker of thought crossing his mind as he processed the information. Mr. Collins, Holmes began, his voice calm yet commanding. You've already told me that your brother was last seen with Gregory Blackwood, but you haven't provided much else. Tell me, do you know where Blackwood is likely to be hiding? Collins shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had been on edge since entering the room, but now, with Holmes asking direct questions, his nerves seemed to reach their peak. I don't know exactly, Collins admitted, his voice shaking. I've asked around, but Blackwood's movements are always a mystery. He operates in the shadows, so to speak. There's talk of him staying in the old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It's said to be one of his hideouts. Holmes leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming with interest. An abandoned house, you say? That's a place worth investigating. But tell me, Mr. Collins, why hasn't anyone else been able to find this Blackwood? Why are the police so certain that your brother simply disappeared on his own accord? Collins' face clouded over with frustration. The police don't believe it's anything more than a simple disappearance. They think he just left, possibly on his own to escape some trouble he got into. But I know my brother. He wouldn't leave without a word, especially not to go to Blackwood. That's just not him. He's a good man, Holmes. He's always been the one to look out for me, and now he's gone. I can't sit idly by. That's why I'm here. Holmes absorbed this, his fingers lightly tapping his chin as he pondered the situation. He had already gathered that Collins was deeply concerned for his brother's safety. But he also knew that people in distress often overlooked small details, details that could provide vital clues. I see, Holmes said slowly. So you believe your brother has been taken by Blackwood, perhaps unwillingly. Yet the police think otherwise. This is a tricky situation, but we won't waste time on conjecture. We'll go straight to the facts. He turned to me. Dr. Davis, prepare to accompany me. We will head to the outskirts of town, to the house where Mr. Collins believes Blackwood is hiding. I have a feeling that there is something there, something that will guide us toward the truth. The journey to the outskirts of town was a quiet one. Mr. Collins insisted on joining us, though I noticed he remained silent for most of the trip. His worry about his brother weighed heavily on him, and he seemed lost in thought, replaying the events that led him to us. Holmes, however, said little during the ride. He was already analyzing the situation, piecing together bits of information like a jigsaw puzzle. The road leading to the abandoned house was narrow and overgrown with ivy and brambles. It seemed like a place no one would willingly venture, but for Holmes, it was the perfect place to look for clues. We passed a dilapidated fence that had long since fallen into disrepair, and as we approached the house, it became clear that this was a place abandoned by time itself. The once grand building was now nothing more than a shadow of its former self, with shattered windows, broken shutters, and ivy creeping up the walls. Holmes surveyed the scene with his usual sharp eye, taking in every detail. He stepped out of the carriage first, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. I followed closely behind, and Mr. Collins hesitated, looking at the house with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. "This is it," Mr. Collins whispered, almost to himself. "This is where I think they've been keeping my brother. If he's still alive, he's somewhere inside." Holmes didn't respond immediately. Instead, he was examining the house from different angles, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every broken window, and every dark shadow. "The house is old and clearly abandoned," Holmes muttered. "But there are signs that someone has been here recently. The door is slightly ajar and there are footprints leading into the house." He crouched down, inspecting the ground carefully. The mud was soft from the recent rain, and Holmes's fingers traced the outline of a footprint in the damp earth. "These are fresh," he said. Whoever has been here is either inside now or left very recently. He stood up, his mind already working. We need to be cautious. We don't know who we're dealing with here. Dr. Davis, keep an eye on our surroundings. Mr. Collins, stay behind us, and don't make a sound unless it's absolutely necessary. We carefully made our way toward the door, which was still slightly open, its hinges creaking under the pressure of time. Holmes pushed it open with a soft touch, and we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and mildew, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the musty atmosphere. As we made our way through the darkened hallway, the only light came from the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The floorboards creaked beneath our feet, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the abandoned house. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes darting from one corner to the next. He approached the first room cautiously, checking for any signs of disturbance. There, lying on the floor near the corner of the room, was a crumpled piece of paper. Holmes reached down and picked it up, unfolding it carefully. The paper was old, but the ink was still legible. It was a letter, hastily written, with a few key phrases standing out to Holmes as he read it aloud. The boy will be brought to me tonight. There's no way he can escape now. Holmes paused, looking over at Mr. Collins, who was staring at the letter in disbelief. "This is it," Holmes said, his voice low. "This letter was written by Blackwood himself. It confirms that your brother has been taken, and it confirms that he's in danger. He was supposed to be brought here tonight." Mr. Collins's face drained of color. "But what does it mean? Why tonight?" Holmes folded the letter back into his coat pocket and looked at me, then back at Mr. Collins. "It means we have little time. Blackwood has plans for your brother, and we need to move quickly. This isn't just a kidnapping. This is something far more sinister. We must find him before it's too late." The first clue had led us to a chilling truth. Gregory Blackwood was already preparing for something far worse than a simple ransom. And now, with the letter in hand, we had a lead, a thread to pull that could unravel the entire mystery. But the deeper we went into this case, the more dangerous it became. Holmes didn't waste any time. He turned toward the door, his expression grim but resolute. "We're not done yet, Mr. Collins. There's more to uncover. Stay close." As we left the abandoned house and made our way back to the carriage, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to be pulled into a much darker and more dangerous game than any of us had anticipated. But with Holmes at the helm, I knew one thing for certain: we were on the right path, and nothing would stop us from finding the truth. Chapter 3. The request for help. As the rain continued to pour outside, we made our way back to the detective agency. The heavy clouds that had gathered in the sky seemed to reflect the heaviness in Mr. Collins's heart. Despite the breakthrough, with the letter, there was still a great deal of uncertainty hanging in the air. Mr. Collins, now more anxious than ever, was barely speaking, his mind racing with thoughts of his brother. Holmes, as always, was methodical, taking the letter in hand and reading it over once more. He was calm, but his sharp eyes never left the paper, as if it might reveal something he had missed the first time. Dr. Davis, who had accompanied us throughout the investigation, was carefully observing Collins, who seemed to be in a state of quiet panic. "Mr. Collins," Holmes said after a moment, finally breaking the silence, "this letter confirms that Blackwood intends to use your brother for something significant, but it doesn't tell us exactly what that is. We must move quickly." Mr. Collins looked up, his face pale but determined. "What do we do next, Mr. Holmes? How can we find him before it's too late?" Holmes straightened in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face, his usual expression of intense concentration settling over him. "The first step is gathering as much information as we can. We need to understand Blackwood's network, his associates, and his next move. This letter was likely written in haste. He may have been planning to act on it tonight, but it could also be part of a larger scheme. Do you think we'll find him if we go to the house again?" Mr. Collins asked, his voice laced with hope. Holmes paused, thinking, "It's possible that Blackwood has already left that location, or is preparing to move your brother elsewhere. We must be cautious, Mr. Collins. But yes, it would be unwise to assume the house is abandoned just because we've already visited it. We may have overlooked something. However, our best course of action now is to widen our investigation." Mr. Collins's eyes were filled with desperation as he stood up, pacing the room nervously. "But, Mr. Holmes, I need to know. What exactly is Blackwood after? Why would he go to such lengths to take my brother? What's his motive?" Holmes leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. His brow furrowed as he began to piece together the clues he had gathered so far. A man like Blackwood doesn't take hostages without a reason. He's a criminal mastermind with connections in various underground circles, and he's likely seeking leverage for something. The question is, what does he want, and why your brother? Holmes continued. Your brother's background is crucial. Thomas Collins, if I'm not mistaken, comes from a family with ties to influential figures. In London, correct? Mr. Collins stopped pacing and looked at Holmes. Yes, that's true. My father, before he retired, was an important banker, but my brother Thomas has always kept to himself. He didn't want to follow in my father's footsteps. He became a teacher, working with children, mostly in private schools. He led a simple life. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. A simple life, but not one without potential. If Blackwood knew about your brother's family ties, it's possible that he's after something more. Perhaps he believes your brother is a key to something larger. Blackmail is often the motive behind such actions. Blackmail? Collins repeated, his voice wavering. But why would Blackwood involve my brother? Thomas never wanted anything to do with that world. Holmes's gaze intensified, his mind working through the possibilities. Perhaps it's not about your brother personally. It could be about the family wealth or influence. Or perhaps Blackwood believes that by taking your brother, he can gain leverage over your father or others within your family's circle. Mr. Collins's face twisted with confusion and worry. But if Blackwood is after my father's wealth or connections, why take my brother? Why not me or someone else who has more direct access to these things? Precisely, Holmes said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of certainty. That's why I suspect Blackwood doesn't want your brother for the reason you think. I believe your brother is a means to an end. Perhaps someone with knowledge, or a secret that can be used for leverage. The next step is to find out exactly what that secret is. The gravity of the situation was beginning to weigh heavily on Mr. Collins, and his eyes fell to the floor in contemplation. He paced once, again, this time more slowly, as if trying to digest the growing reality of the situation. "What do I do now, Mr. Holmes?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with helplessness. "I want to help my brother, but I'm afraid I don't know where to start." Holmes stood up, his demeanor shifting from quiet contemplation to action. "That's precisely why we're here, Mr. Collins. You have already done well by coming to me, and now we will do the rest. I will investigate the connections between Blackwood and your family. I need you to gather any information you can about your brother's recent activities, particularly about anyone he may have been in contact with recently." Mr. Collins nodded. "Of course. I'll do whatever it takes. But please, Mr. Holmes, I need you to understand. I can't lose him. He's all I have left." Holmes looked at him for a moment, and for the briefest second, there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Holmes knew the depth of Mr. Collins's fear. He didn't express sympathy, but there was no mistaking his silent acknowledgement of the emotional stakes. "Rest assured, Mr. Collins," Holmes said firmly, "we will find your brother. There are always clues, and where others see confusion, I see a trail to follow. We will follow that trail wherever it leads. The evening grew darker as Holmes and I gathered our coats and prepared to leave. Mr. Collins, now more determined, stood by the door, ready to begin his part of the investigation. Holmes paused, turning back to him before stepping out into the cold night air. "One more thing, Mr. Collins," Holmes said, his voice low and steady. "You mentioned that your brother was last seen with Gregory Blackwood. If there's anyone who could help us understand Blackwood's network, it would be someone close to him. Do you know anyone who might have had dealings with him? Someone who could provide insight into Blackwood's plans?" Mr. Collins looked troubled for a moment, but then his expression cleared. "I've heard rumors. There's a man named George Hargrave, an old associate of Blackwood's. He's known for his involvement in various shady dealings. If anyone knows Blackwood's plans, it's Hargrave. But he's a dangerous man. Getting close to him won't be easy." Holmes smiled faintly. "That's precisely why we'll go to him. I believe our next stop will be Mr. Hargrave's place of business." And with that, the stage was set for the next phase of the investigation. As Holmes and I made our way into the night, it was clear that the path ahead would be fraught with danger, deception, and complex riddles to solve. But Holmes was resolute. No matter how intricate the case, no matter how elusive the answers, he would always find the way. And for Mr. Collins, time was running out. His brother's fate depended on what came next. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. The fog had thickened as Holmes, Dr. Davis, and Mr. Collins made their way through the narrow streets of London. The carriage rolled quietly over the cobblestones, its wheels muffled by the thick mist that clung to the city like a shroud. As we made our way to the address Holmes had procured from Mr. Collins, the sense of urgency was palpable. The trail was growing colder by the minute, and the investigation had entered a new phase, one that promised more danger, more uncertainty, but also more revelations. Holmes, always silent when he was deep in thought, sat with his hands folded in his lap, his eyes distant as he gazed out the window of the carriage. I could tell that his mind was already at work, piecing together the fragmented information we had gathered so far. Dr. Davis, ever the observer, sat beside me, his brow furrowed in concentration as he occasionally glanced at Mr. Collins, whose face was a mask of worry. Mr. Collins had remained quiet since our last conversation, his anxiety manifesting in the way his hands gripped the edge of his seat. He was nervous, afraid for his brother, and though he was trying to remain composed, the weight of the situation was clear. Every so often he would glance at Holmes as if expecting some miraculous revelation, but Holmes gave no indication that he would speak unless there was something concrete to say. As we neared the address, the carriage came to a stop in front of a run-down building that seemed out of place among the well-kept shops and businesses of the district. The structure was old, with broken windows and a faded sign hanging loosely from a rusted nail. The sign read, Hargrave & Co. Business Investigations. Holmes's eyes lit up as he surveyed the building. "This is the place," he murmured, almost to himself. "Mr. Hargrave is known to operate here, though I suspect that what he offers, under the guise of business investigations, is a far cry from legitimate work." Mr. Collins, now visibly tense, glanced at the building with suspicion. "Are you sure we should go in? Hargrave is a dangerous man. He has connections with people who have done unspeakable things." Holmes turned to Mr. Collins, his gaze firm. "It's precisely because he's dangerous that we must go in. He's part of the puzzle, and without speaking to him, we cannot move forward. If Blackwood has any plan to use your brother, it's likely tied to Hargrave in some way. Trust me, Mr. Collins, we need answers." Dr. Davis, who had been silent up to this point, leaned forward slightly. "Holmes is right. If we are going to find your brother, we must understand the connections Blackwood has. Hargrave might be the key to unlocking that mystery." Reluctantly, Mr. Collins nodded, though I could see that his nerves were getting the best of him. He wasn't used to this sort of confrontation. But Holmes, undeterred by the danger, stepped out of the carriage and motioned for us to follow. We approached the building with caution. The air was thick with the damp scent of the city, and the faint smell of decay seemed to seep out of the old structure. The door creaked as Holmes pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The walls were covered with old newspaper clippings and various trinkets, as though the place had been abandoned for years. But someone had recently made an effort to keep it looking presentable, just enough to give the illusion of legitimacy. Inside, the space was cluttered. The floors creaked with every step, and the air was stale. A desk sat at the far end of the room, and behind it sat a man who looked as though he belonged in a different time altogether. George Hargrave was in his late 50s, with graying hair, and a thick beard that seemed to be permanently stained with ink. His sharp eyes never left us as we entered, and he didn't stand to greet us. Instead, he merely tilted his head, his gaze sizing us up as if he was already calculating his next move. "Mr. Hargrave, I presume," Holmes began, his voice smooth but authoritative. "We're here with a few questions." Hargrave's lips twisted into a tight smile. one that didn't reach his eyes. He took a long drag from a cigarette he had been holding, the smoke swirling in the air like some sort of phantom. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "Holmes, wasn't it? I've heard of you. You've been making quite the name for yourself lately. But I don't deal in anything that's going to interest you, I assure you." Holmes didn't flinch. "I beg to differ, Mr. Hargrave. You see, we're investigating a case that may involve a man named Gregory Blackwood. I understand you've had dealings with him. We need to know what you can tell us." At the mention of Blackwood's name, Hargrave's expression faltered for the briefest moment. It was subtle, but enough for Holmes to notice. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Hargrave's, his voice now sharper. "We know you've been in contact with Blackwood. Your association with him is the missing link in this case, and I suggest you start talking because the longer you keep quiet, the more suspicion will fall upon you." Hargrave let out a low chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "You think I'm afraid of you, Holmes? You're nothing but a meddler, a man who likes to play at being a detective. You're wasting your time here." Holmes smiled coldly. "I'm not wasting my time. You know that. You've been involved with Blackwood's schemes for far too long to pretend otherwise. You can either help us, or I'll make sure that your dealings with him are made public. I'm sure the police would love to know about your little business investigations." For a moment, Hargrave seemed to hesitate. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back in his chair, as though conceding defeat. "You're more astute than I gave you credit for, Holmes," he said, flicking the ashes from his cigarette. "I've known Blackwood for years. He's a man who thrives in the shadows, always plotting, always scheming. He's not the type of man you can reason with, but you already know that, don't you?" Holmes nodded. "I do. Now tell me, what's his plan? What does he want with Mr. Collins's brother?" Hargrave's eyes flickered toward Mr. Collins, who stood silently in the corner of the room, trying to remain calm. "Blackwood doesn't want the boy for any noble reason, that's for sure. He's after something far more valuable than money. The boy is a pawn in a much larger game. Blackwood's got his hands in everything, from illegal dealings to high-profile thefts. But he's also got a reputation to protect, and sometimes a man like Blackwood needs leverage. The boy, well, he's useful for that." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "Leverage? What kind of leverage?" Hargrave leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You've heard of the Aldworth family, haven't you? The boy's father, Lord Aldworth, is connected to some very powerful people. And Blackwood. Well, he's not someone who just kidnaps for money. No, he's after something much bigger, something that could make him untouchable. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Tell me everything, Hargrave. What does Blackwood want with Lord Aldworth's son? Hargrave hesitated, clearly weighing whether he should reveal more, but the tension in the room was palpable. Holmes had cornered him, and there was no way out. Finally, Hargrave spoke in a low voice. He wants to control Aldworth's future. Blackwood's not just after the boy for ransom. He's using the kidnapping as a way to force Aldworth into a dangerous game of negotiation. If Aldworth agrees to Blackwood's terms, the boy will be returned. If not, Hargrave shrugged, a cold smile creeping across his face. Well, you can guess what happens then. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Blackwood wasn't just a common criminal. He was a man of strategy, someone who saw people as tools to be used. But this case was more complicated than just a ransom. It involved power, leverage, and perhaps even more sinister intentions. Holmes stood up, his expression intense. Thank you, Mr. Hargrave. You've been helpful. As we turned to leave, Hargrave called after us. Just remember, Holmes, be careful. Blackwood plays a dangerous game, and if you're not careful, you could end up playing it too. With that, we stepped back into the streets, the cold air biting at our skin. The investigation had taken a darker turn, but now we knew more about Blackwood's motivations. The question remained, what would Blackwood do next, and how far was he willing to go to secure his goals? As Holmes walked ahead, his mind clearly already planning the next step, I couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. We had uncovered one part of the puzzle, but the game was far from over. We were now racing against time, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 5. A Web of Secrets. The fog had not lifted as we left Hargrave's office, but the air had grown colder, carrying with it the scent of secrets waiting to be uncovered. As Holmes, Dr. Davis, and Mr. Collins made their way back to the carriage, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. We were no longer dealing with a simple kidnapping. This case had evolved into something far more sinister, a labyrinth of lies, manipulation, and hidden motives. Holmes, you heard what Hargrave said, I remarked as we climbed into the carriage, the wheels creaking beneath us. Blackwood is playing a dangerous game, and your assumptions about him being after leverage were right, but now we're left with more questions. What exactly does Blackwood want from Lord Aldworth? Holmes, his mind already a whirl of calculations, glanced over at me, his sharp eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and determination. That is the key question, isn't it, Watson? Hargrave's revelations were useful, but we need more. Blackwood isn't after mere money. He wants something much more substantial, something that could shift the balance of power. But what is it? Dr. Davis, always attentive to the details, added, "I've been thinking about the connection between the boy and his father, Lord Aldworth. If Blackwood is after something from Aldworth, it's possible that the boy is only a means to an end. But what could he possibly offer that would be worth such a dangerous game?" Holmes nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's the puzzle, Dr. Davis. And the solution to it lies in understanding the Aldworth family, especially Lord Aldworth's position in society." We sat in silence for a few moments, the carriage rolling slowly through the damp streets of London, the sound of the wheels punctuated only by the occasional flicker of lamplight as we passed. Holmes was deep in thought, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. After a brief pause, he spoke again. "Mr. Collins, tell me more about your family, your father's role in the banking world. The Aldworth name is significant, yes, but what is it that made Blackwood target your brother?" Mr. Collins, who had been quietly listening, looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I don't understand. What does my father's past have to do with this?" Holmes turned to him, his gaze steady. "Your father may have had more influence than you realize. Blackwood's connections run deep, and I suspect that your father's position in banking could have been a factor in his decision to involve you and your brother in his schemes. The Aldworth name is tied to power, and Blackwood may be attempting to leverage that power for his own ends." Mr. Collins was silent for a moment, clearly grappling with the implications of Holmes's words. "I never thought of it that way," he said slowly. "But my father is retired. He doesn't have any direct influence anymore. The bank is no longer his concern." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps, but even in retirement, your father's name carries weight. And if Blackwood were to get his hands on that influence, he could wield it to his advantage. That is why the boy is so crucial. He's not just a ransom, he's a symbol of something far more powerful." The carriage reached the outskirts of the city, and Holmes's words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. We were heading to Lord Aldworth's estate now, a sprawling manor on the edge of London, surrounded by acres of land and towering gates. The estate itself was an imposing structure, a place that represented the wealth and power of the Aldworth family. It was here that we would find answers, or so Holmes believed. As we neared the gates, Mr. Collins leaned forward, his eyes scanning the estate in the distance. "Do you think we'll find anything at Aldworth's estate, Holmes?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Holmes turned to him with a slight smile. "The key to Blackwood's motives is tied to Aldworth's influence, and that influence is likely to be found within these walls. There is more to the Aldworth family than meets the eye. But to understand the full picture, we must first uncover the secrets that lie hidden here." The carriage rolled to a stop at the gates, and the driver opened the door. Holmes stepped out first, his coat billowing slightly in the wind. Dr. Davis followed, his eyes scanning the surroundings with professional curiosity. Mr. Collins seemed more hesitant than ever, his steps slow as he exited the carriage, his face etched with anxiety. Holmes turned to Mr. Collins as we walked toward the estate's entrance. "This may be difficult, Mr. Collins. The Aldworth family has been involved in powerful circles for generations. They don't take kindly to outsiders prying into their affairs. But we must proceed carefully. Do you have any idea where we might start?" Mr. Collins hesitated before answering. "I've not been to the estate in some time, but there's a study, my father's old office. It's locked up now, but I think the key is in my mother's possession. She might have kept it, though I don't know for sure." Holmes's eyes gleamed with interest. "That's a good place to start. Your father's study could contain documents, letters, or other items that could reveal Blackwood's true intentions." As we approached the grand doors of the estate, Holmes's keen sense of observation was fully engaged. He examined the exterior of the house, noting the meticulously maintained gardens, the sharp angles of the stonework, and the heavy iron gates that enclosed the property. Everything about the estate spoke of wealth, legacy, and old power. But Holmes knew better than to be deceived by appearances. Behind these walls, secrets were waiting to be uncovered. Once inside, we were greeted by the butler, a tall, stern-looking man with sharp features and a quiet demeanor. "Mr. Collins," the butler said, his tone respectful yet neutral, "your mother is expecting you. She'll be in the drawing room." Holmes exchanged a brief glance with Dr. Davis before turning back to Mr. Collins. "Shall we proceed?" Mr. Collins nodded, leading the way toward the drawing room. The walls of the hallway were lined with portraits of past Aldworth family members, their eyes following us as we passed. It was a room full of history, but to Holmes, these portraits were simply another layer to peel away in the search for the truth. We entered the drawing room to find Mrs. Aldworth seated near the fireplace, a delicate glass of wine in her hand. Her eyes were cold, distant. There was no warmth in her welcome. She looked up as we entered, her expression unreadable. "Edward, you're here. I see you've brought company." Holmes bowed slightly, his usual calm composure in place. "Mrs. Aldworth, a pleasure." "I trust you're well?" She gave a curt nod, clearly uninterested in pleasantries. "I don't have time for formalities, Mr. Holmes. If you've come to discuss matters regarding my husband's estate, you'll have to wait. My husband is not here at the moment." "We're not here to discuss the estate, Mrs. Aldworth," Holmes replied smoothly. "We're here to understand something much more urgent. Your son, Thomas, he's missing. We believe his disappearance is tied to a man named Gregory Blackwood, and we need your help." Her face stiffened, and for the briefest of moments, I saw something flash in her eyes. Fear, perhaps? Or was it guilt? But before I could analyze it further, she stood up, setting her glass down with a delicate clink. "What exactly do you expect me to do? I've already told you that my son is not my responsibility anymore. He made his choices." Holmes didn't flinch. "Your son is in danger, Mrs. Aldworth. And if you hold the key to understanding why Blackwood is targeting him, now would be the time to share that information." Her lips pressed tightly together, and I could tell that Holmes's words had struck a nerve. She was hiding something. Something more than she was willing to admit. "We'll find your son, Mrs. Aldworth," Holmes continued. "And when we do, you'll have the answer to the web of secrets that has ensnared your family." The silence in the room was deafening. Mrs. Aldworth finally spoke, her voice low but filled with the weight of unspoken truths. "I don't know if you'll like the answers you find, Mr. Holmes," she said quietly, "but I'll give you what I can." And with that, the investigation took another dark turn. As we stepped closer to the heart of the Aldworth family's secrets, it became clear that this case was not only about a missing boy, but about untangling a network of hidden motives, family feuds, and long-buried truths. Holmes had his work cut out for him, but he was ready. We all were. The game had only just begun. Chapter 6. Searching for Clues. The heavy curtains were drawn tight over the windows as the evening sun began to sink behind the clouds, casting long shadows across the study in Lord Aldworth's mansion. The air inside the room felt still, thick, with dust, and the silence was oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the fabric in the heavy armchairs seemed amplified in the stillness. But Holmes was undeterred by the quiet. His focus was laser-sharp, his mind working at full speed as he stood by the study desk, examining the contents of the room with methodical precision. Dr. Davis and I stood by the door, watching as Holmes began to systematically go through Lord Aldworth's papers, his fingers running along the edges of old documents, flipping through books on the shelves, and peering into drawers with a look of both interest and slight disdain. It was clear that he believed there was something hidden within these walls, a clue that would unlock the mystery of the abduction of Thomas Collins and lead us one step closer to understanding what Blackwood was truly after. "Do you think Lord Aldworth's study holds the answers?" I asked, my voice quiet as I leaned against the doorframe. Holmes didn't turn from the desk, but he spoke without hesitation. "I am certain of it, Watson. Lord Aldworth's family has long been involved in significant matters. His estate, his connections, everything points to him having knowledge of much more than he has let on. If Blackwood is indeed after something tied to this family, it will be here, hidden among the documents." Dr. Davis, who had been quietly watching Holmes's methodical search, nodded. "There must be something of value hidden away. Lord Aldworth's financial dealings and his connections with powerful figures would make him a prime target for someone like Blackwood." Holmes stopped mid-action, a piece of paper in his hand. "Precisely, which is why we need to uncover what he's hiding. If Lord Aldworth is trying to conceal something, there's a chance that Blackwood has already found it. But first we must make sure we know exactly what we're dealing with." He paused, examining the paper in his hands. It was a letter. The ink faded with time, the edges of the paper worn and frayed. Holmes studied it for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. He passed it to Dr. Davis. "Here, you take a look at this. It's dated only a few weeks ago from Aldworth's personal lawyer." Dr. Davis took the letter carefully, holding it up to the dim light. "It seems to be an official communication," he muttered. "But what does it say?" Holmes nodded. "That's the key question. It's a letter from Lord Aldworth's lawyer about a financial transaction, one that seems to have been handled in secret, outside the bounds of normal procedures. It could indicate that something valuable was moved recently. It might be connected to Blackwood's involvement." I stepped closer, inspecting the letter over Dr. Davis's shoulder. "It mentions a trust fund, doesn't it? And a transfer of assets." Holmes smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Yes, it does. It seems Lord Aldworth has been securing something, whether money, influence, or something else entirely. This is exactly the kind of thing Blackwood would be interested in." But just as we were beginning to contemplate the significance of the letter, A faint creaking sound interrupted the moment. Holmes immediately stood straighter, his eyes flicking toward the corner of the study where a large bookshelf stood. The bookshelf was filled with rows of old leather-bound books, most of them seemingly untouched for years, but something about the way the shelf seemed slightly askew caught Holmes's attention. "Watson, Dr. Davis," he said, his voice a little sharper now. "The bookshelf. Look closely at the fourth shelf from the bottom." Dr. Davis and I both turned toward the bookshelf, squinting in the dim light. At first, it appeared to be just another shelf of books, stacked neatly. But then I noticed it. There was a faint gap between two of the volumes. A small space, just large enough for something to be hidden. Holmes crossed the room in a few swift steps, his eyes never leaving the shelf. He reached out and pressed a finger against the side of the book nearest the gap. With a soft click, the shelf shifted, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Holmes pulled the books away carefully, revealing a small, locked wooden box resting inside. "Well, well," Holmes murmured, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "It seems Lord Aldworth had more secrets than we imagined." Dr. Davis and I approached, both of us equally intrigued. Holmes knelt down, inspecting the box for any sign of a key or lock mechanism. "This could be what we're looking for. There's a chance that whatever is inside could lead us straight to Blackwood, or at the very least, reveal something vital about his plans." Holmes stood up and turned to Mr. Collins, who had been standing at the doorway, watching the scene unfold with growing anxiety. "Mr. Collins, do you happen to have a key for this box?" Collins' face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he stepped forward. I don't. My mother might have one, but she's kept things locked away in this house for years." "I don't know where she keeps the key." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Very well. It seems we have no choice but to find another way in." With a single fluid motion, Holmes drew a small set of tools from his coat pocket. Precisely the sort of tools one would expect from a man who had spent years honing his craft in the art of locks and keys. "This will only take a moment," he said calmly as he worked. It wasn't long before the soft click of the lock echoed through the room. Holmes carefully opened the box, revealing a small collection of papers. He extracted them one by one, his eyes scanning each document with great focus. "Interesting," Holmes muttered. "These documents appear to be more financial transactions, larger sums of money, dealings with international accounts. There are also several references to something called the Protocol. I suspect this is what Blackwood was after." Dr. Davis, who had been leaning over Holmes's shoulder to get a closer look, spoke up. The protocol? What is that? Holmes shook his head slightly. I don't know yet, but this is clearly more than just a financial scheme. Blackwood's interest in this must be tied to something larger, something much more dangerous than we anticipated. I think this protocol is the real key to understanding what Blackwood is trying to accomplish. Mr. Collins, who had been following the scene closely, stepped forward, his voice low with both fear and determination. Is it possible that these papers have something to do with my brother? Is it possible that Thomas is somehow connected to this protocol? Holmes paused, considering Mr. Collins's question carefully. It's very possible. These documents mention a transfer of assets and several names I've seen associated with Blackwood's network. If your brother is somehow involved in these transactions, it could explain why Blackwood took him. But we need more than just these documents. We need to find the source of the protocol and learn how your brother fits into it. As Holmes carefully folded the papers and tucked them away in his coat, he turned to us with a determined look in his eyes. The search doesn't end here. We have what we need, but we still don't understand the full scope of Blackwood's plan. We need to find the protocol's origin, and we need to do it quickly. Time is running out, and your brother's life could be hanging in the balance. The investigation had taken a dramatic turn. With the discovery of the hidden compartment and the documents that lay within it, we now had a glimpse into Blackwood's broader scheme. But the deeper we went, the more complicated the case became. We were not just chasing a criminal, we were chasing a web of secrets, and the closer we got to the truth, the more dangerous the path became. With the newfound evidence in hand, Holmes was ready to take the next step in our search. There were still many questions to answer, and every clue led to more questions. But for now, we had a lead, a trail that would take us even deeper into the heart of this dangerous mystery. Chapter 7. The First Breakthrough. The days following the discovery of the hidden compartment in Lord Aldworth's study were a blur of activity and mounting tension. The evidence we had uncovered, the financial documents, the mention of the Watch Protocol, and the mysterious transactions were pieces of a much larger puzzle, and yet the puzzle remained incomplete. Sherlock Holmes, ever relentless in his pursuit of the truth, was determined to follow this trail to its conclusion, no matter how convoluted or dangerous the path. Dr. Luke Davis had never seen Holmes so focused, so consumed by the case. His mind worked at an astonishing speed, processing and connecting pieces of information in ways that often left me in awe. He would spend hours poring over the documents from the box, comparing the names and dates with other records we had collected. But each new discovery only seemed to raise more questions. The deeper we delved, the more complex the mystery became. And yet, despite the overwhelming uncertainty, Holmes never faltered. "I've been over this a dozen times, Watson," Holmes said one evening, his voice tinged with frustration as he leaned over the papers in the small, dimly lit room we had set up as our temporary base of operations. "There has to be something I'm missing. Blackwood is clever, too clever for his own good. We've seen how he works, how he orchestrates his schemes, and yet something about this doesn't add up." I glanced at Dr. Davis, who had been watching Holmes closely. He, too, seemed concerned. "You've been working non-stop, Holmes. Perhaps a rest?" "No," Holmes interrupted, shaking his head sharply. "Rest won't help us now. We're close. So close I can feel it, but something isn't right. There's a detail we're overlooking, something that could tie Blackwood to Aldworth's involvement in this protocol." I glanced at the papers once more. We had already analyzed Lord Aldworth's financial records, the documents hidden in the box, and even the strange letter Hargrave had mentioned. But none of it seemed to explain why Blackwood would go to such lengths to kidnap Thomas Collins. The protocol was clearly central to everything, yet its true nature remained elusive. Holmes stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and began pacing the room. His eyes were narrowed, his mind clearly working through the problem. "Again," he muttered to himself, repeating the key pieces of the puzzle in an almost rhythmic way. "The protocol. Blackwood's interest. Aldworth's ties to powerful figures. Why did he involve Thomas Collins? It's not about money. Not just about influence. It's something more. But what?" Suddenly, Holmes stopped mid-step. His face lit up with an almost imperceptible spark of realization. He turned to Dr. Davis and me, his eyes wide with excitement. "Of course!" he exclaimed, startling both of us. "I've been focusing on the wrong aspect of this case. It's not about Aldworth's money or power, nor is it simply a matter of leverage. Blackwood isn't after Aldworth's influence. He's after a much more specific target, the protocol itself." I blinked in confusion. "But what's in the protocol that Blackwood would go to such extremes to get it? Why kidnap Thomas?" Holmes's expression softened, and he began speaking more methodically, as if he were explaining something to a student. "The protocol, as we've seen from the documents, involves an agreement between several influential figures, a secret pact, if you will. Blackwood, a man who thrives on information, would know that such an agreement contains knowledge of the highest value. If Aldworth is involved in this protocol, then it means something extremely valuable is at stake. something that, once uncovered, could provide Blackwood with the power he seeks. Dr. Davis furrowed his brow, beginning to understand. But Thomas, what's his connection to all of this? Holmes looked at us, his eyes sharp with clarity. That's the breakthrough, Dr. Davis. Thomas Collins isn't just a bystander. He's involved, intimately involved. The boy has something the protocol is built around. His knowledge, his potential. Perhaps even more precisely, a key to unlocking the protocol's true purpose. I took a step forward, my mind racing to catch up. So, Blackwood kidnapped Thomas not because of his family's wealth, but because Thomas is somehow the linchpin to the protocol? Holmes nodded, his excitement growing as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Exactly, Watson. Thomas Collins is the key. Blackwood must have learned that Thomas holds a piece of critical information, something that ties directly to the protocol. Aldworth may have thought he could keep his family's secrets safe, but Thomas, for reasons unknown to us, has inadvertently become the one person who can either destroy or reveal everything. Dr. Davis's eyes widened. So the kidnapping wasn't a random act of violence? It was a calculated move to gain control over Thomas. Blackwood wants to control what Thomas knows. Precisely, Holmes replied. But we still don't know exactly what that is. The question now becomes, what exactly does Thomas know, and how does it tie into the protocol? The answer is likely hidden in Aldworth's past, or, more specifically, in his interactions with Blackwood. There was a long pause as we all processed this new line of thought. The significance of Holmes's breakthrough was undeniable. We were no longer just chasing shadows. We had discovered the true motive behind Blackwood's actions. Thomas wasn't just a victim. He was a critical player in a much larger game. But there was still so much more to uncover. Holmes, now energized by the revelation, turned to us with renewed purpose. We need to act quickly. Thomas's life depends on us finding the next piece of the puzzle. If we are to uncover what Thomas knows, we must focus on Aldworth's history, on the details of his dealings with Blackwood. Somewhere in Aldworth's past lies the secret to this protocol. It's there, waiting to be discovered. We wasted no time. Holmes, Dr. Davis, and Mr. Collins began to work in tandem, going over the information we had gathered so far. We pored through Lord Aldworth's personal letters, old business records, and private correspondences, looking for any clue that could shed light on what had happened between Aldworth and Blackwood in the past. As the hours stretched into the night, we finally stumbled upon a single, seemingly insignificant letter. one that had been buried in a stack of routine correspondence. The letter was from years ago, signed by Lord Aldworth himself, and addressed to an unnamed associate. It was brief, but the words stood out. The protocol is to be sealed with Thomas's name. No one else can know its contents. I trust you understand the stakes. Holmes's face lit up as he read the letter aloud. This is it. This letter confirms everything. Thomas's name is tied directly to the protocol. He is not just a witness. He is integral to its survival. Whoever this associate is, they knew Thomas's importance long before Blackwood did. Dr. Davis nodded in agreement. This letter is the breakthrough we needed. It's clear now that Thomas holds knowledge of the protocol, knowledge that Blackwood would stop at nothing to control. Holmes folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his coat. We have enough to move forward. We now know that Thomas's role is not merely passive. He is the key, the central figure in this conspiracy. We must find him before Blackwood does. The breakthrough had come. The puzzle was beginning to take shape, and the path ahead was clearer than ever. But time was running out, and Blackwood was still out there, waiting. With this new understanding of Thomas's role, we were one step closer to finding the missing boy and bringing an end to Blackwood's dangerous game. Holmes stood, his eyes shining with determination. It's time to end this. We will find Thomas, and we will uncover the full extent of the protocol. This mystery ends now. And with that, we set out once again, the pieces falling into place with every step. The hunt was on. Chapter 8. The Truth Unravels. The days following the breakthrough were filled with a palpable sense of urgency. As we pieced together the fragments of Lord Aldworth's past, we could feel the weight of the truth pressing ever closer. Sherlock. Holmes, ever the meticulous observer, had mapped out the key points of the investigation. But there was one critical question we still didn't have the answer to. What was truly at the heart of the protocol, and why had Blackwood gone to such extremes to secure Thomas Collins? Our small base of operations was awash with papers, notes, and maps, all of them connected to the larger web of mystery we were trying to untangle. The walls seemed to close in as we worked tirelessly, hoping that somewhere, hidden among the countless details, we would find the key to ending this case. It was one rainy evening when we received an unexpected visitor. The door to our study creaked open, and standing in the doorway was a familiar, though unexpected, figure. Lord Aldworth himself. Holmes, who had been leaning over a stack of letters, looked up sharply. His eyes flickered with recognition, but remained as steady and piercing as ever. "Lord Aldworth," he said with a slight bow, his voice polite but cool, "to what do we owe the honor of your visit?" The air was thick with tension as Aldworth stepped into the room, his presence imposing as he closed the door behind him. His face, usually calm and controlled, now appeared strained, his eyes shadowed with worry. He was clearly not a man accustomed to showing his emotions, but the weight of this situation was clearly taking its toll on him. "I've come to speak to you about my son Thomas," Aldworth said, his voice tight with apprehension. "I understand that you've been investigating his disappearance, Mr. Holmes, and I fear that what you've uncovered will be more than you bargained for." Holmes didn't respond immediately. He simply regarded Aldworth for a moment, his fingers steepled in front of him as he processed this new development. Dr. Davis and I exchanged looks, sensing that we were on the verge of something significant. Aldworth sighed heavily and took a step forward. "I know you've been looking into the protocol, and I know that you've uncovered my connection to it. But what you don't understand is the full extent of its implications. It's not just about money or power or influence. It's something far more dangerous." Holmes's gaze never wavered. "I'm listening, Lord Aldworth," he said quietly. "What is it that you've been keeping from us?" Aldworth's eyes darkened. "The protocol is not merely a financial arrangement, nor is it a simple business deal. It was an agreement made many years ago, a secret pact between myself and a number of powerful individuals whose names I've spent years trying to forget. Blackwood was not supposed to be involved, but somehow he got hold of the information, and now he's using it against me, against my family. He's threatened everything I've worked for." Holmes leaned forward, his interest piqued. "And what exactly is Blackwood after, Lord Aldworth? Why has he involved your son, Thomas?" Aldworth's face tightened, and for a moment he appeared to struggle with his emotions. "It's Thomas," he said finally, his voice breaking, with a mix of regret and fear. "Thomas is the key. He is the one who can unlock the protocol's full power." The room fell into a heavy silence. Dr. Davis and I exchanged shocked glances, but Holmes's expression remained calm, as always. He had clearly anticipated that there was more to the story, but hearing Aldworth confirm it was another matter entirely. "Your son?" Holmes asked, his voice steady, yet carrying an undercurrent of incredulity. How could Thomas be the key to something like this? What exactly does he know? Aldworth ran a hand through his graying hair, clearly torn. between his duty to protect his family and the overwhelming guilt that seemed to weigh him down. It's not about what he knows. It's about what he is, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Years ago, when Thomas was just a boy, I made a terrible mistake. I got involved in something that I thought would secure my family's future, something I thought would give us the power to control our destiny. But I didn't understand the full extent of what I was dealing with. Holmes leaned in, his eyes narrowing with intense focus. Go on. Aldworth's eyes flickered, briefly toward Mr. Collins, who had been standing quietly by the door, before speaking again. The protocol is a secret document that links certain families to an ancient and powerful organization. It's an organization that has been manipulating events behind the scenes for centuries. I was approached by their representatives, who promised me unimaginable power, wealth, and influence in exchange for my family's loyalty. The protocol was their way of binding us to their cause. I could see that Aldworth was struggling with the weight of his own words. But there was a catch, he continued, his voice dropping lower. The protocol wasn't just a political agreement. It was an agreement that required a sacrifice. Thomas was chosen as the one to carry the burden of this pact. The members of this organization believed that his bloodline was key to unlocking the full potential of the protocol. I didn't understand it at the time, but now I know. Now, Blackwood knows too. Holmes's expression had shifted slightly, still, calm, but now tinged with the gravity of the revelation. So, Thomas is a pawn in a much larger game. Blackwood must have known about his connection to the protocol, and he's using your son as leverage to gain control of this power. Aldworth nodded grimly. Exactly. I tried to keep Thomas away from it, but I couldn't protect him from everything. Blackwood has been lurking in the shadows for years, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Now, he has Thomas, and he's forcing me to comply with his demands. Holmes stood up, his eyes now filled with a mixture of determination and something resembling pity. I understand now. Blackwood isn't just after your wealth or influence, Lord Aldworth. He wants the full power of the protocol, and to unlock it, he needs Thomas. But the real question is, what does he intend to do once he has it? Aldworth shook his head. I don't know. All I know is that I can't let this happen. I've already lost so much in my pursuit of power, but I refuse to lose my son. Holmes turned to me, his gaze steady. Watson, I believe we've reached the heart of the matter. Blackwood has been using Lord Aldworth's past to manipulate him into doing his bidding. And now, Thomas is at the center of it all. We must act quickly to stop Blackwood from completing his plan. The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Collins, still standing quietly by the door, stepped forward, his face pale. "What do we do now, Mr. Holmes? How do we save Thomas?" Holmes looked at him, his eyes sharp and calculating. "We need to get to Blackwood before he completes whatever he plans with the protocol. If Thomas is truly the key, then we must make sure that Blackwood doesn't use him as a tool. Time is of the essence." Aldworth took a step toward Holmes, his face desperate. "How can I help? I will do anything. Just tell me what to do." Holmes's gaze softened for the briefest moment. "There is still much we don't know, Lord Aldworth, but we do know one thing. Blackwood is using the protocol to manipulate you, and now he's using your son to gain control of it. The best thing you can do is help us track down Blackwood's next move. You know his associates better than anyone. It's time to use that knowledge to our advantage." Aldworth nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes. We cannot let Blackwood win. Not again." With that, we set off once again. The truth had unraveled, but it had opened up an even greater mystery, one that would take us deep into the heart of Blackwood's plans. And for Thomas Collins, the clock was ticking. Chapter 9. A Shocking Revelation. The tension in the air was thick as Holmes, Dr. Davis, Mr. Collins, and I made our way through the shadowed streets of London. The truth had finally begun to unfold, and with it, a sense of urgency that pressed down on us like the heavy fog around us. We knew now that Blackwood wasn't merely a criminal mastermind looking to ransom Thomas Collins for money. No, Blackwood's plan was far darker, far more calculated than we could have ever imagined. As we made our way to the carriage, Holmes's mind was in overdrive, processing the new revelations from Lord Aldworth. The protocol, Thomas's unexpected role in it, and Blackwood's manipulation of Aldworth had shaken us all. What was once a case of a missing boy had spiraled into something that threatened not only the safety of Thomas Collins, but also the balance of power itself. "I think we're about to uncover something far darker than we anticipated, Watson," Holmes muttered, his voice low but filled with determination. "The protocol isn't just about the manipulation of one family. It's about control over an entire network of power. Blackwood is far more dangerous than I originally thought." As the carriage rattled over the cobblestones, I couldn't help but glance at Mr. Collins, who sat next to me in silence. His face was pale, his knuckles white from gripping the edge of his seat. His fear for his brother was palpable, but now it seemed that something deeper than family loyalty was at stake. There were forces in play that none of us could have foreseen. And we were all caught in the web. "Holmes," Mr. Collins said suddenly, his voice shaky, "what exactly is it that Blackwood is trying to do with Thomas? What is this protocol? You said it's tied to a network of power. What does that mean?" Holmes turned his piercing gaze toward him, his eyes steely with resolve. "The protocol, Mr. Collins, is a secret pact that binds together certain powerful families, business magnates, political figures, even international criminals. It's an unholy alliance, a way to control not only money and resources, but also the very course of history. Blackwood, as I suspect, has been using this protocol for years, but now he wants more. He wants full control over it. And to do so, he needs your brother." Mr. Collins stared at Holmes in confusion, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. "But why Thomas? What makes him so important?" Holmes leaned forward, his voice steady. "Your brother is the key to unlocking the protocol's true power. He's not just a pawn, Mr. Collins. He's integral to its very foundation. His role in this is more than mere coincidence. It's possible that your father, Lord Aldworth, made a pact with certain individuals tied to the protocol, and Thomas, by virtue of his bloodline, was marked as the one who could activate it." I could see the understanding slowly dawning on Mr. Collins's face, but before he could speak, Holmes raised a hand. "But we're not done yet. There's something more. Something even more chilling than we anticipated." The carriage came to a halt in front of an old, nondescript building. On the outskirts of London, the darkened windows and ivy-covered walls gave the place an air of decay, and yet it stood in stark contrast to the bustling city around it. This was where we would find the next piece of the puzzle. Holmes stepped out of the carriage first, his coat flapping in the wind, and motioned for the rest of us to follow. "This is where it all began, gentlemen. If Blackwood has been manipulating Aldworth, then the answers we need are hidden here. We're going to find out exactly what Blackwood's ultimate goal is, and what Thomas's true role in this grand conspiracy really is." As we entered the building, the air grew thick with the scent of dust and mildew, as though the place had been abandoned for years. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and there was a faint hum in the air, almost as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The room we entered was dimly lit, and at the far end, there was a desk covered in papers and old files. Holmes walked toward the desk without hesitation, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. He reached the desk and immediately began rifling through the papers, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The rest of us stood by, watching in silence. knowing that the next few moments would likely determine the fate of Thomas Collins, and perhaps the world itself. "This is it," Holmes muttered under his breath. He pulled a thick leather-bound folder from the desk and opened it. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. "I should have seen it earlier. This is the real protocol, the one that's been hidden all these years, and it's tied to something far more dangerous than I could have imagined." The room felt colder as Holmes began reading aloud, his voice steady but filled with an unmistakable tension. "The protocol isn't just a document, it's a blueprint, a map for establishing a global network of power, one that's been in place for generations. And it all points to one thing: control over the world's most valuable resources, knowledge, wealth, and most terrifying of all, influence over the minds of nations." I took a step forward, my heart racing. But what does that have to do with Thomas? Why is he the key to all of this? Holmes's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something resembling fear in his expression. "Because, Watson, Thomas's bloodline is directly connected to the founding families of this global network. He's not just a passive player in this game. He is one of the blood heirs to a powerful dynasty. A dynasty that's been hidden from the public eye for centuries." The weight of his words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Mr. Collins, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "Are you telling me that Thomas is, what? Some sort of heir to this network of power?" Holmes nodded grimly. "Yes, Mr. Collins. Your brother is one of the last remaining heirs to a long line of individuals who have been grooming the world's most influential families for centuries. He's not just important because of what he knows, but because of who he is. Blackwood must have discovered this secret, and that's why he kidnapped him." The room fell silent as the truth of the situation began to sink in. Thomas Collins wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was at the heart of a conspiracy that spanned generations. His existence was not just a matter of family heritage. It was tied to a larger, far-reaching network of power, and his role in it was far more significant than we had ever imagined. Holmes closed the folder with a quiet snap and turned to Mr. Collins. "You've been living in the shadow of a secret, Mr. Collins. Your brother's life is tied to something far larger than anything you could have anticipated. And now we must find him before Blackwood can use him to cement his control over this network." Dr. Davis spoke up, his voice grave. "But what happens once Blackwood has control of this network?" What does he plan to do with it? Holmes's eyes were hard, his mind already working through the possible scenarios. He plans to use it to manipulate world events, wars, economies, governments. Blackwood has the potential to control the course of history, and he's been waiting for the right moment to strike. We all stood there in silence, the weight of the truth sinking in. Blackwood's plan wasn't just a personal vendetta against Aldworth or a way to extort money. No, Blackwood was attempting to change the very fabric of global power itself. And Thomas Collins, unwittingly, was at the center of it all. Mr. Collins's voice broke through the silence, his tone trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "What do we do now, Holmes? How do we stop him?" Holmes turned to him, his face set with grim resolve. "We find Thomas, and we stop Blackwood, no matter the cost. This ends now." The revelation had been shocking, darker than anything we had imagined. But now that we knew the truth, there was no turning back. We had no choice but to move forward. And with every step we took, the shadow of Blackwood grew larger, threatening to swallow us all whole. But Holmes had always been ready for the fight. And now, more than ever, we had to stand together and bring this dangerous game to its final irrevocable conclusion. Chapter 10. The Final Twist. The cold air that swept through the streets of London felt oppressive, like the city itself was holding its breath in anticipation. We had come so far, uncovered so many truths, and yet the final pieces of the puzzle eluded us. The revelation that Thomas Collins was the heir to a hidden legacy, a bloodline tied to a global network of power, had shaken us to the core. Blackwood's manipulation of Lord Aldworth and his obsessive pursuit of Thomas had led us into a labyrinth of secrecy and lies. But now, it was time to confront the mastermind behind it all. The final confrontation was drawing near, and the stakes had never been higher. We stood in front of a building that, on the surface, appeared to be just another crumbling relic of the past. But Holmes had been meticulous in his investigation, and he had deduced that this was the place, the heart of Blackwood's operations. Every step we had taken, every piece of information we had gathered, had led us here, to this very moment. If we didn't act now, everything we had uncovered would be lost. Holmes stood in front of the door, his expression a mask of cold determination. The final twist of the case was within reach, and I could see the flicker of excitement in his eyes, his mind already working through the strategy, calculating every move. It was a feeling I had come to know all too well, that sense of inevitable resolution that only Holmes could conjure. "Are we ready?" I asked, my voice steady but tinged with a sense of urgency. Holmes turned to face me, his expression inscrutable. "We have no choice, Watson. Blackwood's plan has come to fruition, and we can't afford to hesitate any longer. We must stop him before he uses Thomas to gain control over the protocol." Mr. Collins, who had been silent until now, stood beside us, his face drawn with worry and determination. "How do we know we'll find Thomas in there?" he asked, his voice low but filled with a quiet resolve. "What if Blackwood's already moved him?" Holmes glanced at him, his gaze steady. "We won't know until we go in, Mr. Collins. But we've already learned one valuable truth. Thomas's role is far more significant than anyone realized. Blackwood is holding him here, and we need to act swiftly. We don't have time to waste." With that, Holmes led the way into the building, his every step measured and deliberate. The interior of the place was far darker than the streets outside, the only light coming from a single flickering lamp at the far end of the hall. The air smelled stale, thick with dust and neglect. It was clear that no one had stepped foot here in years, yet the place was still oddly well preserved, too well preserved, for something that had been abandoned. We moved cautiously down the narrow hallway, every footstep echoing off the walls. It was as if the building itself were alive, waiting for us to make our next move. As we approached the door at the end of the hall, Holmes paused, signaling for us to stop. He turned to Mr. Collins, his voice low but firm. "This is it. We're about to find out exactly what Blackwood has been planning, and exactly what Thomas's role in all of this truly is. You must be prepared for what we're about to uncover." Mr. Collins nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I'm ready, Holmes. I just want to find my brother. I don't care what it takes." Holmes's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. "Then let's finish this." With a swift movement, Holmes pushed open the door. The room we entered was nothing like we had imagined. It wasn't some grand office or laboratory filled with sinister machinery. No, it was far more unsettling. The room was dimly lit, and at the center stood a large, ornate chair, its back turned toward us. And there, sitting in that chair, was Thomas Collins. But it wasn't the reunion we had hoped for. Thomas wasn't bound or gagged, nor did he appear to be in any distress. In fact, he sat perfectly still, his posture erect, his expression blank. It was as if he had been waiting for us all along. "Thomas?" Mr. Collins called out, his voice shaking with emotion. Thomas's head slowly turned, revealing his eyes. But there was something different about them. Something cold. Something empty. His gaze met Mr. Collins's, but it lacked the warmth, the familiarity that we had expected. "You've come to save me," Thomas said, his voice strangely detached. "But you can't, Edward. It's already too late." The words hung in the air, a chilling realization beginning to settle in the pit of my stomach. Thomas's expression remained unreadable, as though he were no longer the person we knew. "What do you mean, Thomas?" Mr. Collins stepped forward, his voice desperate. "What's going on? Why are you here? Blackwood didn't kidnap me, Edward," Thomas interrupted. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "He didn't take me. I came here willingly." The shock of his words hit us like a wave. Mr. Collins froze, his eyes wide in disbelief. No, Thomas, what are you saying? You're telling me you came here on your own?" Thomas nodded slowly, his face still devoid of emotion. "I've known about the protocol for years, Edward. I knew about it before anyone else did. And I knew that Blackwood was coming for me. But I didn't resist. I didn't run. I chose to come here because I've accepted my role. I'm part of something bigger than both of us." Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. "You're saying you're a willing participant in all of this, Thomas? You've been playing into Blackwood's hands all along?" Thomas's lips curved into a thin smile, a smile that held no warmth, no familiarity. "It's not about playing into Blackwood's hands, Mr. Holmes. It's about embracing what I was always meant to be. I am the key to the protocol. I was born for this, just as my bloodline was destined for it. Blackwood didn't force me. He didn't need to. I've always known this day would come." The room fell silent, the weight of Thomas's words settling over us like a heavy shroud. It was a truth more unsettling than anything we had uncovered so far. Thomas had never been an innocent bystander. He had been part of the conspiracy from the start, whether he had known it consciously or not. "You're telling me," Mr. Collins said, his voice trembling with disbelief, "that you've known about this all along? That you've been part of this protocol?" Thomas nodded, his gaze never wavering. "Yes, Edward. I've always known. And now I am ready to fulfill my purpose. Blackwood and I are aligned. He doesn't need to control me. I've already chosen my path." The revelation hit us like a thunderclap. Blackwood wasn't the mastermind manipulating Thomas. Thomas was the one who had orchestrated everything from the beginning. He had known about the protocol all along, and he had chosen to embrace it. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a carefully calculated move, with Thomas as the true mastermind behind it all. Holmes stood motionless for a moment, his sharp mind racing through the implications of this shocking twist. "So, you've been working with Blackwood from the start? This was never about saving you. It was about using you to complete the protocol." Thomas's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "It was never about saving me, Mr. Holmes. It was always about power. And now, it's mine to control." The room grew colder as the truth began to unravel before us. The last twist in the case had turned everything upside down. Thomas Collins was not a victim. He was the architect of his own fate, a player in a game much larger than any of us had realized. And Blackwood, far from being the mastermind, had simply been a pawn in Thomas's hands all along. As the full weight of this revelation sank in, we knew that the battle was far from over. But the stakes had just escalated to a level none of us had anticipated. Thomas was not just the key to the protocol. He was the one who held the power, and now he had taken control. "We must stop him," Holmes said, his voice steady despite the shock of the revelation. "This is not over yet, not by a long shot." The hunt was no longer just for Thomas. It was for control over the protocol itself, a battle that would change the course of history. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.